Next one will be a UW Whitewater Community Survey presentation by Police Chief Dave Moore.
Good evening, Council. David Moore, Police Chief. Police departments struggle to define success, and much of that has to do with our mission and the elements that we provide the community. It's hard to define all that a police officer does. It's hard to define all that a police department does. For example, we could spend the rest of this evening talking about the various efforts that a police officer does or a police department does, and we could make a very long list, and we could come back tomorrow and add to that list. So within that struggle for defining what we do, it is hard to judge success. I'll compare and contrast that to private industry. Private industry has distinct advantages to police departments in that they have units of labor, units of material, and always have a profit and loss statement. So it's very tangible and quite easy to determine whether, in private industry, whether you're being successful or not. One way that we can have an indication of success is a safety survey. And we partnered with UW Whitewater and conducted such a survey. We had a baseline survey in 2009, and we had the follow-up survey in 2015. I can tell you that it is not without risk that we run these surveys. I could be standing before you having to answer for some very tough questions had the survey not turned out well. The fact of the matter is that the survey turned out quite well, and it tends to be supportive of the police department's initiatives. This survey was conducted in a post-Ferguson world and in a time when the policing profession is under question. This survey was also conducted in Janesville's post-GM world. GM has been closed for about 8 years. In 2015, we have a much better idea what Janesville is like without GM and the catastrophic loss of all of those jobs and the economic loss because of the loss of that company. I'll suggest to you that in our post-GM Janesville, we could have lost some neighborhoods. We could have lost a couple of neighborhoods to crime and disorder and made it very difficult for all of us. But the fact of the matter is that we did not lose these neighborhoods, and we continue to thrive. Some of the aspects of this survey are very police department specific as to some of the services we offer and the value of those services. But other parts of the survey speak to the quality of life in Janesville and the overall safety in Janesville. And I must tell you, there are many partners that are a part of that. Our school system, our different city departments such as the code department, transit, DPW, traffic engineering, to name a few. Our county partners with the criminal justice system and our mental health professionals, and private industry with the various jobs that are available in this community, Forward Janesville, and our healthcare industry that helps us. So it's not lost on us that when it comes to safety and quality of life in Janesville, it's all of us that are working together that provides for that. I'd like to introduce Professors Susan Johnson and Jolly Emery. They are with the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater Center for Political Science and Public Policy Research. These are the researchers that conducted the survey in 2015, and will walk you through as to how the survey was conducted and what the findings are.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Susan Johnson, and this is my colleague, Jolly Emery. And thank you for having us. Jolly and I were here in 2009 to present the findings, and so we're glad that the police department invited us back to do the follow-up survey in 2015. So to keep it brief, we're going to go through pretty quickly some of these findings, but we will have time for some questions if the council members have them afterwards. So as Chief Moore indicated, the intent here was to do a follow-up from the survey that was administered in 2009 to see where there had been areas of improvement, where there might be some issues of concern, and the like. And And also, as Chief Moore indicated, doing a survey like this is a way for a public entity to gauge whether or not it's doing the job that it hopes it's doing for the citizens, in this case of the city of Janesville. So there were three main parts of the survey. One, dealing with issues related to the quality of life in Janesville and perceptions of safety. Also, the importance of services that the police department provides, as well as evaluating those services. And then, how comfortable are citizens in approaching members of the police department. 5,000 surveys were sent out, and we received back just over 1,100 for a response rate of 22%, which for a survey of this type is actually a very respectable number. We were quite pleased with the response rate that we received. Just a general overview of what we found. First of all, it's important to note that the findings were fairly consistent with what we found in 2009. We'll highlight some areas where there were some differences throughout the presentation. 80% of the residents of Janesville said they were satisfied with the quality of life. And then actually we cover all of these throughout the presentation, so in the interest of time, I won't talk about each one of these individually right now. But to get us right into that quality of life, you can see that 80% of residents said that they were either very satisfied or satisfied with the quality of life in Janesville. And this was very consistent with what we found in 2009. And you can see just a very small percent, 7% of people said that they were not satisfied. So very strong numbers there. We also asked residents of Janesville how safe they felt under a variety of conditions. So for example, walking in your neighborhood during the day, walking in your neighborhood at night, walking outside of your neighborhood during the day and night, and then doing some other things, driving, shopping, at work. And as you can see, the only area where there was really any concern, we would argue, was among people saying that they were not necessarily very comfortable walking outside of their own neighborhood at night. And that's not necessarily hard to understand. You're in an area that you're not familiar with, and you might not feel as comfortable as you might be in your own neighborhood. So that's really the one that we would point to as being the only area of concern. Otherwise, you can see when you look at the percent of people who are safe and very safe, the numbers are quite high, okay, including walking in your neighborhood at night. Even there, over 60% or so of people said they felt safe doing that. We also asked residents of Janesville how important they felt a number of services are, and what you can see is that, again, for the most part, residents of Janesville find almost everything that the police department does is very important, except enforcing parking laws. So that one wasn't that much of a shocker to us either, and I can see you all can appreciate that. So, but this again was very similar to 2009. People see the different sorts of things, be it educational programming, be it enforcing different types of laws, providing crime prevention services, responding to calls, all as being very, very important. Okay. We also asked how well residents thought the City of Janesville Police Department did in terms of providing different services. And what you'll see here is that, again, we had fairly strong response rates on a number of issues. And the items on the far left are the collapsing of the very good and good indicators. And I'll point out here that in comparing these data to 2009, there were 7 where the percent of people who said that it was good or very good went up by 10% or more. Okay, so that's a really nice finding that I think the police department should be happy with. And those 7 were community policing, enforcing juvenile laws, enforcing drug laws, enforcing parking laws, enforcing quality of life issues, enforcing traffic laws, and then responding to calls. So again, on 7 items, the percent of people who said that the PD was doing very good or good went up by 10% or more from 2009. And another thing to point out, which I think is a positive thing, is that in 2009, there were much higher percentages of people who responded that they just don't know and they weren't able to evaluate. Those numbers went down considerably. So the numbers of don't knows and neutrals went down pretty much across the board from 2009. And what that would suggest is that the police department has been getting the word out in terms of letting the citizens of Janesville know actually what it is that they do. So those are two big findings to point to here. So that's evaluating the performance. We also asked about how important do you believe different types of services are. And here, again, there's a lot of support for what the police department does. What we found is that people tend to prioritize the highest, what we would consider things like crime prevention, which isn't that surprising, or response. So for example, responding to 911 and things like that. And in this table here, there were 5 items where the idea of what was important or very important went up 10% or more from 2009. And those were Bike Patrol, Citizen Academy, Honor Guard, National Night Out, and Youth Explorer. So those are all services that the police department provides, I would say, is more of an educational or community service effort. So those are things where we saw an increase from 2009 to 2015 in terms of perceptions about what is important. And then a final question before we break it out by patrol area is that we asked residents, how comfortable do you feel approaching police department officers and office staff? And again, these numbers were pretty similar to 2009, and you can see that we had 47% say they were very comfortable and 38% say that they were comfortable, so 85% total. And one thing to point out is that while the numbers of very comfortable and comfortable are pretty consistent between 2009 and 2015, the percent who said that they were very comfortable went up from 38% to 47%. So there was a big jump in the percent of people who said that they were very comfortable. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jolly Emery now, and she's going to briefly talk about how some of these things break out by the different patrol areas in the city.
Yes, so I'll very briefly go through how these things break out. We did dig deeper looking at particularly those conditions that Susan talked about earlier with respect to how safe you feel in the city of Janesville, but by patrol area. So what you should pay attention to here is you can see the blue bars are very safe and safe collapsed together. So that represents the percentage of respondents who said that they felt very safe or safe in their neighborhood under these various conditions that Susan went over earlier. And as you can see, that where we start to see some differences, and this of course is patrol area 1, where people don't feel very safe is, as Susan mentioned, walking outside their neighborhood at night. And again, that finding isn't surprising. I want to add that in general, I can move on to patrol area 2 to show you, in general, we see the same pattern where, for the most part, people do feel very safe in the city of Janesville under most conditions, except for walking out of their neighborhood at night. We did look to see where people felt safest, looking across the patrol areas, and we found that people in Janesville feel safest in patrol areas 2, 5, 7, and 8. They feel generally safe in patrol areas 1, 3, and 4, but not as safe as they do in 2, 5, 7, 8. And then they felt the least safe, or reported the least perception of safety in patrol area 6. But we're cautious in reporting that about patrol area 6 because the response rate, the number of people who responded to the survey in patrol area 6 is very, very small. So it's not a very reliable finding. So patrol area 3, again, you can see this pattern where in general people feel very safe, although some differences, walking in their own neighborhood at night, they don't feel quite as safe. And then essentially walking outside the neighborhood at night, again, is where we see this big dip or precipitous drop with respect to perceptions of safety. Patrol area 4, similar. Patrol area 5, patrol area 6, patrol area 7, and, patrol area 8. And if you have some questions about that, we'd be happy to answer them afterward. Now, another thing that we did was we looked at this question regarding how comfortable people felt approaching police officers and staff of the Janesville Police Department across patrol areas. And you can see that there is a pretty good degree of comfort. Here we have very comfortable is blue, comfortable is in red. And then there are a few instances in which people feel uncomfortable, a few patrol areas where people feel uncomfortable approaching police officers or Janesville Police Department staff. But those, as far as that level of discomfort, it reaches as high as 12% of respondents. So that's a very low number of respondents at any one patrol area who do not feel comfortable or feel very uncomfortable approaching police department officers and staff. And that's an important finding as well. So generally people feel pretty comfortable, as Susan said earlier, approaching members of the Janesville Police Department. Now, what you might find more interesting, and some of you in this room probably responded to the survey, are those open-ended responses, the opportunity that you had as residents or citizens to answer some questions with regard to your own perceptions or your own feelings about certain issues regarding Janesville Police Department. One of the open-ended questions asked, as you can see, if you could change one thing about the Janesville Police Department, what would it be? And so what I have here for you are basically the majority type of responses that we got to the open-ended questions. And many people responded that they'd like to see more patrols. And this issue regarding more patrols was interesting because some people wanted to see more patrols in general, some people wanted to see more patrols in specific areas, and then some people wanted to see more patrols at night. More officers and staff. And here again, some people just thought that the Janesville Police Department could use more manpower, or women power, I should say, people power, in different capacities in the department. Others were very specific about wanting to see some more diversity in the department, more diversity, whether it be gender diversity, racial diversity, or ethnic diversity, or all three. Bike patrols. Bike patrols are a big thing in the city of Janesville, we found. And so lots of people really like the idea of bike patrols and like to see more bike patrols. Community relations. This came up frequently, and citizens responded that they would like to see more interaction between citizens and members of the Janesville Police Department in more social settings or perhaps more instructional settings when police would come or staff would come and speak to members of the community in a school or in a community center or something along those lines. And then it should also be noted that a number of people responded that the police department doesn't need to change anything, that they're doing a great job. And in some instances, people felt free to name the chief as one of the reasons that the police department is doing such a great job and commending his job, and then other officers as well were cited. So that was one response to an open-ended question. Another important open-ended question that we asked citizens on the survey were, what are the two biggest problems you see facing the City of Janesville Police Department in the next 5 years? And as the slide reads, over 70% of respondents believe that substance abuse and crimes related to substance abuse was the biggest problem that the City of Janesville Police Department was facing in the next 5 years. About a quarter of residents also responded they thought gang activity and those crimes related to gang activity were the biggest problems facing the police department in the next 5 years. And then some other things were noted as well, which are fairly common, but to a much lesser degree than the first two. That was violent crime, property crimes, budgetary issues, both with respect to the Janesville Police Department and with respect to the city, and then juvenile crime and crime in general. Finally, citizens were asked what additional programs or services they thought the Janesville Police Department might try to provide. And so, again, bike patrols. So bike patrols patrolling 24/7. So it's just something that the city really seems to like. More foot patrols, better communication with residents about existing programs. So as Susan noted, it seems that the residents of the city know more about the programs than they did in 2009, but some would like to know even more information. Programs targeting young children and teens, getting to know residents, kind of community policing issues, getting to know residents by face and name, gun safety, alcohol awareness, programs for seniors, bike safety. So that's about more canines for canine drug units. And then also some assistance with cybercrime. And then finally, once again, you have people responding that Janesville Police Department already does a great job. They already offer a lot of different programs, and they don't need to do anything else. So Susan is going to wrap this up with some conclusions and recommendations.
So just in conclusion, briefly, again, we'd like to reiterate that residents of Janesville generally agree that Janesville is a good, safe place to live and work. And they're satisfied with what the police department is doing in terms of the services it offers and the way that it offers those services. A couple of the things that Jolly mentioned in terms of areas maybe perhaps in need of improvement, communications of services, different programming, I'm sorry. One of the issues that was brought up in terms of diversity on the force, both racial and gender diversity with the staff and its officers. And again, some of the issues that residents still see as being very important would be substance abuse and things with crime related to substance abuse. And then we discussed at length with Chief Moore the low response rate in Patrol Area 6 and strategies to get more responses there. And it's a common problem in survey research to in certain populations to get a high response rate to surveys. And so this is no different from what goes on nationwide when you're surveying populations that might be more suspicious of government, not as familiar with government, and the like. So this is not unique, but we do recommend, and we did brainstorm a little bit with Chief Moore about ways that we might be able to tap into the population in Patrol Area 6 where we didn't get a very strong response rate. So with that, we're welcome to take questions.
Any questions? Councilmember Farrell.
Thank you. Your presentation was very good and explained, a lot about how our citizens feel about the police force. One thing as far as the sample size, you send out 5,000. Did you send out equal amount of surveys to each patrol area? That's the part I'm a little confused about.
The survey was drawn, the sample was drawn from the assessor's office, and so it was done by parcels within the city, so there were 21,000-ish possible areas to draw from, and so it was representative of the city of Janesville.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that I found a little interesting, was a perception that the safety in our schools is good, or a lot of people don't know what the status is? What's your perception on that? Do you think people feel that our schools are safe? I kind of looked at it, I thought I saw pretty low percentages, like
It was
60%.
Overall, it looks like it was 70% who said they were safe or very safe.
Okay,
Yeah, and that's in figure 2. And then there might have been some variation based on the patrol areas. But for the most part, the percent who thought that they were unsafe or very unsafe was, I'm just eyeballing my table, it looks like maybe 4 or 5%. And then you had about 12% or so who was neutral on that. And then we excluded the people who don't know. So I think what you're seeing there are actually people who might not know
right.
because they're not in the school. So I
Right.
wouldn't be alarmed necessarily by that number, because I think there's more that just don't know because they don't have children in school and they're not as familiar.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Good. Councilmember Bob Zine.
Thank you. I had the same concerns that Councilman Farrell had about the survey size to each patrol area. I just look at the map of the city and the size of the patrol areas. Patrol Area 8, for example, is probably 5 to 6 times Patrol Area 6. So no wonder 5 to 6 times more surveys perhaps came from that area. So if you'd had equal numbers in each patrol area, that would kind of make more sense to me and you may get equal number of people back. But you alluded to the fact that, say, in rental areas, you may not get as many, or people who are suspicious of government in general, you don't get as many back. I understand that. But you just took it generally from the city, but patrol areas, I can see why size patrol area 8 is safest. It's huge, and so the police know better. They don't need to send as many, send a lot of patrol officers in that area. So, and getting, you said 22% back is good overall, but that's still it's 1,100 out of 5,000 surveys. 1,100 people out of a city of 63,000. Is that statistically still valid in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're doing this kind of research, the acceptable range actually varies from under 10% to, close to 30%. So we were comfortable with the response rate. And when Chief Moore asked if we wanted to maybe do a second mailing, I mean, we said, let's not, because it would save money, honestly, because there's a great cost. And we were very comfortable. And aside from the issues breaking it down by patrol area and the problems with that, the responses we got back did match fairly closely with the demographic profile of the city, except for the fact that it's skewed older. And again, that just happens when you do surveys of this nature.
Didn't it skew much, for lack of a better term, whiter?
It skewed a bit whiter. Yeah, it skewed more for age, and so we weighted the data so that the age, the way it was represented in the findings, was more better reflective of the population of Janesville as a whole. Otherwise, you can get skewed results that way.
Yeah, and the samples went out randomly, but people are motivated differently to send it back. And like you alluded to it, older people probably a little more motivated to send it back, a little more, been around a little longer, they felt it more of a need to do. So that skews too, does it not? I mean, so
motivation, right. Motivation to respond to surveys always, unless you can force everyone to do it, there's a motivational factor, and you can correct for some of that, which we did with age, but you can't correct for motivation unless you get, or willing, or liking to do surveys, you know what I mean? Or feeling like your voice matters. Those things all come into play without a doubt.
So how comfortable are you in regards to that, the validity of the survey overall?
I still think we're comfortable with it to the same extent that we would be with any survey like this, that, you know what I mean, that you just recognize those are issues and you're upfront about them, and then that's how you move forward. But again, in terms of matching the profile of Janesville, we did our best to make sure that it was mirrored there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for
Yeah.
the
Sure.
presentation. Thank you.
Councilmember Dupree?
Well, I want to thank you. This has been really interesting to hear what kind of things the people are responding to. Just had a couple questions. How often would you suggest that this kind of thing be done?
Well, I think Chief Moore's goal was to do it every 5 years, and we were just about a year behind on this. And I think that depends on resources. I mean, perhaps every 3 years. I don't think you need to do it. Do you think much more than every 3? I think five's a nice thing. But if you were thinking you wanted to do it more often, every 3. But I don't think you need to do it every year. I mean, it's resource intensive.
And just for some perspective, have you done similar things with other communities? And how do we compare overall with what others are finding?
I don't want to hog the microphone.
Okay. So similar things in terms of police departments and
Right, doing a police
No.
survey of how they're meeting the needs of the people.
Not police departments. So we've done other citizen satisfaction surveys and planning surveys with Whitewater and Sheboygan, but we have not done any police department surveys except for this one.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much.
I just had a couple for you. Was it pretty clear on the survey that whoever filled it out wouldn't be identified? Is there ever a concern that you won't send it back in because they might know who I am?
Yeah.
There is a comment on the survey that indicates that your response is anonymous. Yep. And you may answer anonymously. I promise that no attempt will be made to match your answers to you. So there was an introduction by Chief Moore on there. So, I mean, we tried to protect that.
Okay. And then, is this going to go on our webpage? Are the citizens going to be able to access this survey on our?
It certainly can. I would imagine that we could post it under the PD's webpage or a link from our city webpage.
Yes, it's already on the PD's
good.
website. We certainly can move it over to the cities as well. As far as the anonymous nature of the surveys, they had my promise that they were going to be anonymous. That was in the opening. The surveys came back to the police department. We didn't have a clue who was sending what. But if I were to do this again, I would have the surveys mailed directly to UW-Whitewater. That was an error I made, and I think it would just make people feel more comfortable to have them to go to a third party than come back to the police department.
Mhm.
But I can tell you, when they came in, they'd come in, 50 at a time, and we had no idea where they were coming from or whose they were. There was no way for us to locate that.
Okay. And then on the, when you put it up on the website, it'll show these different areas, the 8 areas, so you could see where you lived and how your neighborhood
Yes, it will.
responded to
Yes.
it, or you could look at the bad ones and see where they were and that kind of
Right.
stuff.
Yes.
Okay, and then for you, any surprises in this survey that stood out for you, Dave?
I had concerns, I guess, more than surprises. Like I say, there was risk in running these. I could be having to answer some pretty tough questions here today, and that's not the case. I was also concerned about the survey going out in a post-Ferguson world and what that connection with the police officers would be based on the national narrative. What I draw out of this is we need to keep doing the work that we're doing, and we need to continue to reach out to our citizens, and we need to continue to give feedback on the work that we do and the cases that we investigate. That's pretty clear to me. Even the bicycle and motorcycle patrols that or the foot patrols that are asked, again, I think that is just an extension of the citizens wanting to have that personal relationship with the officers that patrol their areas. So we're going to continue to look at the data, look at the survey, see what changes we can make in the police department. We like the fact that it's broke down by patrol area, because I can take those surveys and take it right down to those patrol officers and explain, these are the concerns of the citizens that are in your patrol area, and try and personalize that for those patrol areas. That's why we looked at it the way we did per patrol area. But as far as any red flags or real bad news here, no, it's just not there.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Bob Zine?
You answered my questions. I was going to ask you how you're going to use this survey. You just answered that question, but I think I could probably speak for everybody up here that we have great faith in you, Chief Moore, and great faith in your police department and all your police officers.
Good, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good, thank you.
Appreciate your survey work too also. Anyone else?
Oh, I do have a comment. When was the survey done?
It was done in early 2015. So it's
Okay.
about a year ago, just under a year ago.
So the efforts that the police department had in my neighborhood, which is 6, last summer, of having the block parties and such, one would expect, and I certainly expect, has addressed some of the concerns about not feeling connected and being more willing to speak with officers and not being so shy about that interaction. So I want to appreciate the efforts you've already done in that area.
I just want to add one quick comment about the anonymity. The surveys, although they may have come to the police department, they came back taped or stapled, or there was no way that you could really read the responses, because we had to do all the untaping of Whitewater and all the unstable. We hired students who helped us do that too. And Susan and I were not from Janesville, so we don't know a lot about the areas. There's no way that we could identify. Our students weren't from Janesville, so they couldn't use any of the information that was responded to. There were no names on the surveys, except maybe the officers or the chief being named in open-ended response. So I think anonymity was pretty well protected.
They weren't numbered.
We numbered them for purposes of the data set, right? So we just go through with a ballpoint pen. This is 1, 2, 3, 4.
But
that's
not
it.
ahead of time.
Nope, numbered by us with a Sharpie. So, yeah.
Great, thank you very much.